The present is always embedded in the past, and the past relationship was also defined and determined by the German former Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, who believed very much into change through trade. And that means basically, okay, leave aside some political and cultural issues or differences and focuses on trade, right? So it's a kind of a non-political subject, and then try to get closer to each other, to understand each other, to establish a dialogue, etc. So that was pretty much the philosophy for a while. And though you cannot underestimate the Europe relationship to China without the US, of course, right? So the US always influenced the European stance on China, but at that time it was not China important, but Russia. From the academic side, you also had influencer scholars who emphasized that you should accept and respect the different history of China. Recently, I think this has changed, unfortunately, and you can sense when you speak with old China observers from the West, there's a little bit of a depression there, because secretly they all hoped that China becomes like the West. Right? They accepted it, but kind of implicitly they hoped they will eventually, turn in a liberal democratic like the West. And the concern we all know is that China got economically and technologically, very strong in certain fields, and even stronger than maybe in Europe or in the US. So in this sense, the history has suddenly stopped to informing us that we should still, respect the difference, So that's the situation. So currently we do not follow the history in that sense. So, and if you don't learn from the history, the future becomes uncertain. I think Europe doesn't find a balance, but Europe has to find itself in this situation. And I think Europe become more real because of, thanks to actually Trump, in a way, that maybe Europe relied too much on that relationship and was not building its own identity, because it's busy with itself in establishing the European Union, and that's very problematic currently, or is weakening because of certain developments like Brexit and a certain populism. If you don't know your own identity, then it's difficult to interact with the other. So Europe needs to sort out itself first, and I think it's trying hard. And it's both situations now. It's a competition, and it's still the sense that we need to collaborate with one another. The problems the world is facing are global. There are many climate change. There are technological trends which are global. And then there are other forces, like maybe terrorism, etc. So there is a sense of collaboration in this respect. And I think the number one, dialogue. You should not stop talking. Even though you see a lot of differences, you have to talk to one another and find common areas where you can collaborate with together. And the question of competition, though, that is probably very difficult to answer, because when you face a different system, you then tend to protect yourself, because you cannot deal with the other side. And I think that's the problem, and that needs to be resolved, and on both sides. I think both sides have to compromise. We need to find a mechanism that ensures that trust on both sides. Two competitors are always also two partners. Belt and Road, from my understanding, was launched as a kind of an alternative to a weakening global economy. China wanted to seek a new growth model, a global growth model, and this is how Belt and Road was introduced. And also it has some implications. You need to kind of protect your markets, right? You need to protect your trade routes. This is a common practice which the West also does and did in the past. So, and I think the West, Europe and the US is concerned in multiple ways. One way would say, okay, China just creates new dependencies. So I think, in a way, you know, when you talk about the other in psychology, you actually talk about yourself. Because what the West accuses China is exactly the history of Europe. And actually probably in a much more awful way, in a very imperialist way. And China tries also desperately to find a sustainable way of implementing Belt and Road. And I think it's just overlaid by ideological differences here.